When we come back on the other side, we're going to dive into some more of the details about this to help you gain a different, perhaps better understanding of the fiscal cliff and why we are where we are. Stay tuned. We'll be back on the other side. You're listening to the Palmetto Conservative Show here on the Conservative Broadcast Media Network.
I always loved watching the kids play basketball. I still do, even though things have changed. It's funny, they can't find jobs to get their careers started. And I can't afford to retire. And now we're all living together again. I supported President Obama because he spoke so beautifully. He promised change, but things changed for the worse. Obama started spending like our credit cards have no limit. His healthcare law made health insurance even more expensive. We've had stimulus and bailouts. Obama added almost $16,000 in debt for every American. How will my kids pay that off when they can't even find jobs? Now Obama wants more spending and taxes. That won't fix things. I had so many hopes. Cutting taxes and debt and creating jobs. That's the change we need. Tell President Obama to cut the job-killing debt and support the New Majority Agenda at newmajorityagenda.org.
From Iraq and Afghanistan, our brave warriors are coming home, wounded. Some with wounds you can see, some with wounds you can't see. Wounded Warrior Project was created to support our men and women coming off the battlefield. Please help carry these warriors the rest of the way home. Get involved at woundedwarriorproject.org.
Welcome back into the Palmetto Conservative Show here on the Conservative Broadcast Media Network. I'm your host, Jim Lee. Thanks for being with us tonight. As we make our transition here from just mere conversations about when the going gets tough, the tough go on vacation, and the end of 2012, and we'll leave it up to you to decide whether it's goodbye and good riddance or just glad to see you go. But, you know, facts are stubborn things, and cliff-bound we go. We are heading over the fiscal cliff, whether we like it or not, because for those of you that don't follow along with legislative action with the degree and fervor that those of us who do talk shows and those of us who are political junkies do, there is a certain amount of time that the leadership has to provide for members of Congress to get to Washington. And right now they're all, well, most all of them are home, ostensibly having celebrated the Christmas holiday, the federal holiday known as Christmas. And to my knowledge today, no call was made, either in the Senate or the House, to come back to Washington to vote on anything. In fact, the president apparently is going to cut short his vacation and fly back from Hawaii to Washington to provide steadfast leadership in these conversations, these discussions around the fiscal cliff, hopefully to come to a solution. I think, quite frankly, all he's doing is probably making an emergency trip back to Washington, number one, to get away from Michelle, and number two, because he's probably heard that the Republicans are there on the doorstep at the White House, prepared to capitulate on every possible point. And make no mistake about it, regardless what the Republicans do, whether they capitulate, whether they give ever so slightly, the end result of all this kabuki theater is Nothing. It's a Pyrrhic victory for Washington and for politics, but it does nothing for the American people. Because the dastardly truth behind all of these numbers and everything is that the math doesn't work. And the markets are smart enough to know that, and we can expect to see a reaction one way or the other, in my view. And to that end, over at the Zero Hedge blog, Kyle Becker, blogger, came out with a neat little column today listing the 75 economic numbers from 2012 that are almost too crazy to believe. Almost. Now, am I going to go through all 75? Yes, Jim, I'm going to go through all 75 just because I can and because I want to make a point. To listen to this president over the last 4 years talk about how things were recovering and how things are getting better and we're making progress and blah, 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 and how the mainstream media has carried that water, and quite frankly how Republicans have tried to throw around pixie dust and put a smile on what is otherwise put lipstick on what is otherwise a pig, things are not fundamentally getting better. Are there bright spots, pockets within the economy that are doing well? Certainly, as there always were. There were people who managed to succeed in the Depression. But as I go through this list, you have to ask yourself, are we better off now than we were 4 years ago? Or 8 years ago? Or 16 years ago? To wit. Number 1 on the list of 75 economic statistics from 2012, which Tyler Durden accurately calls almost too crazy to believe. Number 1, back in the 1970s, about 1 out of every 50 Americans was on food stamps. Today, about 1 out of every 6.5 Americans is on food stamps. Now, depending on whether you're a glass is half full or half empty kind of person, or whether you're one of those statisticians that, as the saying goes, figures lie and liars figure, you could either draw the conclusion that, wow, a lot more people are on food stamps today than 40 years ago. Or, if you're a liberal, you would say, wow, look at how many more people we can make dependent on the federal government. Isn't that great? Number 2, when you account for all government transfer payments and all forms of government employment, more than half of all Americans are now at least partially financially dependent on the government. More than half. Number 3, for the first time ever, more than 1 million public school students in the United States are homeless. That number has risen by 57% in the last 6 years. So, what's the relationship here? Clearly, the public schools are causing people to become homeless. And they're successful at it because 57% more of them are homeless now than were 6 years ago. Number 4, only 24.6% of all jobs in the United States are good jobs. Now, I'll be the first to tell you that the term good jobs is subjective and not defined. But if only 24.6% of all jobs are considered good jobs, that would mean that 75.4% of them are not. Today, number 5, today the wealthiest 1% of all Americans own more wealth than the bottom 95% combined. to say that the wealthy have managed to do better than the rest would obviously be an understatement. And that's okay. What does that say about us as Americans? Well, that bottom 95% are the ones providing for that top 1%. You have to ask yourself, what's that bottom 95% doing with their money? Number 6, median household income in the U.S. has fallen for 4 consecutive years. Overall, it has declined by over $4,000 during that time span. Household income going down. Combine that with the soon-to-be felt tax increases. You can imagine what a joyful noise people will be making when they enter 2013 and get that first paycheck and go, what? Number 7, families that have a head of household under the age of 30 have a poverty rate of 37%. So those that are under 30, that are heads of household, have a poverty rate of over 1/3. I guess that would tie in with number 5, with the wealthiest 1%, and the saying that the rich are getting richer and the poor are getting poorer. Number 8. In September 2009, during the depths of the last economic crisis, 58.7% of all working-age Americans were employed. This is September 2009. In November of 2012, 58.7% of all working-age Americans were employed. It is now more than 3 years later, and we are in the exact same place. The number of all working-age Americans has not changed. And number 9, when you total up all working-age Americans that do not have a job in America today, it comes to more than 100 million people. But I'm sure that if you go back 4 years or 8 years or 16 years, it was just as bad, right? Number 10. The U.S. share of global GDP has fallen from 31.8% in 2001 to 21.6% in 2011. It would be interesting to compare and contrast that with what's happened to other nations in the global GDP. Certainly makes you wonder, does it not? I look at this and come to the conclusion that, in fact, our economy is not robust. Our economy is not growing. Our economic situation is not improving. That at best we're at a point of, were it not for unprecedented moves on behalf of the Fed, we are at a point of stagflation. And we are seeing net incomes decline, the cost of goods increasing, the rich getting richer, the poor getting poorer, more becoming dependent on public assistance, on the government, and a government which borrows 44 to 46 cents out of every dollar it spends. Objectively speaking, that hardly seems like progress to me. Maybe it does to you. Maybe you look at it differently than I. Well, I can't say that it does, but that's up to you. When we come back, we'll continue down this list, looking at some of the the more interesting of the remaining 65